Welcome back to NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning. You have been with us for a whole module, a module that was introductory in nature, a module that dealt with various aspects of nature that were particularly of contemporary interest, for instance like international English, the globalization of English, world Englishes, the rise of cultural studies, etc. We are now in the second module, and in fact this is the second lecture in this module, the first lecture being of a general introductory in nature, and this lecture is entitled Old English. Now this may be today for many of you, only of a certain historical interest, or for some of you maybe to just get by in understanding the development of English from the time of the Anglo-Saxons. In the first module, we had a lecture entitled The English Language, in which many of the things that or some of the things at least that we are talking or going to talk about in this module were already addressed. What we do today is look at the beginning of the English language, and you would be, those of you who are not yet acquainted with it would be really surprised to see how different the so called Old English was when compared to even early modern English or modern English or contemporary English or Englishes as we know them today. Okay. You have learned by now at least this, that English belongs to the Indo-European group of languages. In the lecture on the English language, we had dealt with some of these pieces of information, okay. And today let us look if only not if only at from a curiosity, okay, from a historical curiosity, historical linguistic curiosity about the English language and its sort of its antecedents, right. So welcome then again to what I hope is going to be an interesting module on the development of language that is used by so many today. As always, let us then look at the texts that are going to be with us throughout this essay, and I must say that I am looking at some of the more well established texts, okay, texts that were that are still today used as textbooks in particularly in undergraduate English major, okay, English major courses in different parts of India and also abroad. The first text is, and I am sure many of you are acquainted with the name of Professor Alfred Baugh, A.C. Baugh's book, The History of the English Language, which has by now been through several editions. Simeon Potter's beautifully written Our Language, published by Penguin Books, and I have also included a volume edited by Indrani Ghosh entitled A History of English Language, a Critical Companion. So, as with so many of my lectures, what I am going to do is I am going to bring in extracts, okay, from these books, and then explain those extracts as we begin to talk about the phase of English known as Old English. Fine. Despite a few differences, okay, a very minor, almost trivial differences in date, it is usually an established fact today that historically we ascribe the period from the middle of, please look at this slide, from the middle of the 5th century, okay, from the middle of the 5th century to the middle of the 12th century, okay, as the time or duration of the kind of English that we call Old English today. Okay. So, it is from the 5th century to somewhere around 1150, okay, the 12th century, that we call the time or the period of Old English. Okay. So, this is what we had also seen earlier. Let me again look at this so that we can place the different historical phases of the English, the development of the English language. Old English 5th century to 1150, Middle English from 1150 to 1500, Modern English is post 1500. Of course, some also add an intermediate stage before Modern English known as Early Modern English. Okay. But it is safe to say, okay, that these are the 3 phases of the English language and its development. Now, you also came across this, that the original inhabitants, if one can today use such a term, the inhabitants were before the coming in of the Anglo-Saxons, it was the inhabitants were the Celts, okay, and the Celtic language, please look at this slide, the Celtic language may be divided into Gaelic or Gaelic and Cymric or Britannic, right. So, before Old English proper, okay, we had the Celtic language. Now, if you ask someone, okay, what is Old English? So, how do we characterize Old English? One of the first things we have to say, of course, is that it belongs to a sub branch of the Indo-European language, and the sub branch is known as West Germanic. Okay. In fact, if it is said that Old English, okay, the Old English phase of the English language is similar in many aspects to the German language, to modern German, okay, compared to modern English. So, it comes from West Germanic as a language, and the period, please look at the slide, the period from, this is a very important historical event or a series of events, okay, the period from the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons. This is a term you need to learn immediately, okay. The Anglo-Saxons, the coming in of the Anglo-Saxons into this island, okay. So, the period from the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons in Britain to the Norman conquest, okay, is usually seen as the Old English period. So, what was the first way in which in the first kind of taxonomy we had used what? We had used dates, okay. We had said that from the 5th century to the middle of the 12th century is designated the period of Old English, and now we we look at that the designation of the period from the point of view of 2 conquests, okay, 2 important conquests. So, the period from the arrival, okay, of the Anglo-Saxons to Britain to its conquest, okay, or to her conquest by the Normans, this period is known as Old English. So, the Latin words, the next point, Latin words brought by the Anglo-Saxons and words from the Celtic language of the Celts intermixed to form Old English. So, just a while ago, remember we learned that there were two varieties of the Celtic language, and then with the coming in of the Anglo-Saxons, okay, we can, in a very general way, we can say, quite safely say that Old English contains words from these tribes, if you may use the word, European tribes that came into Britain and the already existing Celtic language. Hence, Latin words brought by the Anglo-Saxons and words from the Celtic language of the Celts intermixed to form Old English. Now, if you look at this slide, if you look at the map of modern England, right, today's England, you would then say that, or the United Kingdom, sorry, you would say that this Old English was prevalent in most parts of England, and in Scotland in the southern and eastern parts. Okay. So, England and the southern and eastern parts of Scotland are where we would have found the Old English language prevalent. So, let us then look at remember Simeon Potter's book on English language is a seminal text with us, and let us see how he mentions, okay, how from where we get an idea of Old English. And he points to one work in particular. Okay. He says, I am quoting him, our knowledge of it, that is of Old English, is derived from the ecclesiastical history, from this word, okay, ecclesiastical history of the English people, which was written in Latin by the Venerable Bede about 730, nearly 3 centuries after the first Jutes, Hengist and Horsa landed at Ebb's fleet in the Isle of Thanet in 449. Okay. So, this the ecclesiastical history of the English people is an important source of our knowledge of Old English. Now, when we talk about the Anglo-Saxon conquest, okay, we refer to 3 different tribes that invaded England. Okay. These were the Jutes, the Saxons and the Angles. Okay. So, the Jutes came from Jutland or Jutland, the Saxons from Holstein and the Angles from Schleswig. So, this is known as the Anglo-Saxon conquest. Okay. The Jutes, the Saxons and the Angles. The other important factor here is also, the Romanization of Britain, okay, the Romanization of the island. For instance, A.C. Baugh says that regarding the introduction of Roman ways of life, by the 3rd century Christianity had made some progress in the island, and in 314 bishops from London and York attended a church council in Gaul. Next, he says about the introduction of Latin in Britain. Latin did not replace the Celtic language in Britain as it did in Gaul. Its use by native Britons was probably confined to members of the upper classes and the inhabitants of the cities and towns. On the other hand, Potter has this information to give. To the English intruders, the Celts offered neither friendship nor culture, and little by little the latter were driven westward. Okay. So, we find that the Celtic resistance to it was limited, and as Potter mentions here, okay, they offered neither friendship nor culture, and little by little the latter, that is the Celts, were driven more to the western part of the island. We know that most of England and the southern and eastern parts of Scotland are where the the Old English phase of the English language is today accepted to have been extant. Then Baugh goes on to say about the conquest. Many of the Celts undoubtedly were driven into the west and sought refuge in, it's very important, Wales and Cornwall. We will still find remnants of the language. Okay. Many of the Celts undoubtedly were driven into the west and sought refuge in Wales and Cornwall. In any case, such civilization as had been attained under Roman influence was largely destroyed. The Roman towns were burnt or abandoned, and that is why from the point of view of a civilizational change, if we may put it, not simply a conquest, okay, a territorial conquest, but also a civilizational, that is why this period is extremely important. Okay. It was a civilizational change that came over with the giving, the sort of giving way by, if I may use the word, by the Celts, and the destruction of the Roman influence. Okay, it marks a very important, or it's a very important landmark in the history, not only of the history history of the English language, but also of history in the island in general. So, what were the three tribes? They were the Jutes, they were the Saxons, and they were the Angles. Okay. So, do you know where the name English or England comes from? Okay. Out of the three, obviously, you would understand, you would guess that the word has its roots in the Angles. Okay. So, the names England and English, right. The writers in the vernacular call their language English with this spelling, right. English is derived, the word is derived from the name of the Angles, and England, which is called Engleland or Angleland, see Angles, from Angles, Angleland or later Engleland, okay, from which is shortened to England, right. So, the name England is derived from the tribe, the conquering tribe called the Angles. So, the word is derived from the name of the Angles. England, that is the land of the Angles, was formed around the year 1000. Okay, the year 1000 is generally accepted. Okay, it's not that there are no other scholars who claim probably different date near to this, but for general purposes we accept the year 1000, right. The English language that we use today is a result of, this is an important word, fusion. Okay, is a result of the fusion of the dialects spoken by these Teutonic tribes who had come to England, right. So, it's a fusion of several dialects which we are going to look at, right. An important point here is also regarding the so called purity of language, right. Even speaking from a political angle, from a cultural politics angle, okay, you cannot really say that any language is pure without being sort of quote unquote contaminated by another language. Okay. The English language itself began as a fusion, right. We know there is a Latin influence, the Celtic influence, okay, and the influence or the coming in of the Anglo-Saxons. The basis of the study of Old English, right, on which it is this other part we are going to look at a little later. The basis of the study of Old English are the manuscripts that have been found in the West Saxon dialect, and this forms a major part of Old English literature. Okay, a bit about the literature, you can skip this slide for now. Now, it is important to know that there was no one variety, okay, of Old English. It is today recognized that there were four, it is accepted that there were four dialects, okay, or variants of Old English. Now, we know that the word dialect today is of course contested, and dialects are today claimed to be languages. Okay. So, nevertheless, this is how we look at it from the conventional point of view, and this lecture and the other lectures in this module, finally down to modern English, is I am going by the conventional way in which this has been accepted, and I am not really getting into the politics of the history of the English language. We dealt with a lot of that in the contemporary times. That way our the debate is more dense, there are many Englishes. Here in this module I am generally following, I mentioned in the beginning, such texts as A.C. Baugh, ones by A.C. Baugh and Simeon Potter. Okay. This is the accepted history, and hence I am using words like dialect, right. So, there were four dialects of Old English, okay, and these are the Northumbrian dialect, okay, the Mercian dialect, right, the Kentish dialect and the West Saxon, right. Look at this: Northumbrian, Mercian or Mercian, West Saxon and the dialect from Kent, right. So, these were the four variants, if I may use the word, of Old English prevalent during the time. So, what are the characteristics then of the English language during the time of Old English. Okay. So, basically I mean very basically here really the characteristics of Old English may be enumerated as follows. One is of course a very different pronunciation. Okay. So, first point is regarding pronunciation. The pronunciation of Old English words, okay, differ from that of their modern equivalents. There is an absence of those words derived from Latin or French, and is a relative absence, and the grammar Old English is synthetic, but modern English is an analytic language. Okay. So, what are the three characteristics of Old English, which it's not that there are no other characteristics, but what you would one of the first things that you would notice at least is that the pronunciation and the script are very different from the English that we use today. Okay. In grammar, okay, there is a distinction of number, singular, plural and case, and grammatical gender was not dependent upon considerations of sex. For instance, Mona, moon is masculine, son is feminine, maiden, girl, wife, child are neuter, while woman is masculine, because the second element of the compound man is masculine. So, this is another, in case of gender, there are several differences that we find from modern English. Then I will quickly read through the other features which are important as we study Old English or look at Old English. The twofold declension of the adjective, the strong declension used with nouns when not accompanied by a definite article, for instance, God man or good man. Then there is a weak declension used when the noun is preceded by an article, for instance, the or say, God a man or the good man. Then the personal pronoun is singular, dual, okay, it has singular, plural and a dual form, right, that we do not really use today, and the presence of strong and weak verbs. Now, coming to Old English literature, the literature of the Anglo-Saxon period in England, okay, is considered to be a very rich literature, right. As Baugh mentions, the literature of the Anglo-Saxons is fortunately one of the richest and significant of any preserved among the early Teutons. Okay. And this is a text, so look at this slide, this is a word or name, title of a text that many of you are familiar with. Okay. The text is Beowulf, I don't know if you can see this properly, Beowulf, Beowulf. There is also the Seafarer, then Caedmon's Hymn, okay, the tragedy The Wanderer, and translations that took place under its very famous king known as King Alfred. So, if you get a question like name a few or name a couple of important texts of Old English literature. So, you would first of course mention Beowulf, to talk about Caedmon's Hymn, okay, among others, and also refer to translations that had taken place under King Alfred. Now, this is I have actually taken it, this has been taken from the Wikipedia, must acknowledge this here. Look at the script of Old English, right. Now, if you look at the script here and if you look at the spellings, and there is nothing here I am sure that you will be able to read. Okay. This is an instance or this is an example, okay, of Old English, its script and in general its language, right. So, this is how Old English looks like. Then I have also taken this from the Wikipedia, which is if you look at the lines, some lines from Beowulf, okay, from the poem Beowulf. Look at, this is the language, this is language in which it has been written, that is Old English. Okay. So, if you look at the what, this is the corresponding modern variant of that. Okay. Then this is another version. right? If you look at king, right, this is again, these are again some other, right, some other examples from Beowulf. So, as you can realize, obviously this is an English that surely neither you nor I or anyone who is not familiar with Old English or trained in reading of Old English, in the reading of Old English, we are never going to be able to decipher this kind of a script or language, right. So, what then, let us go back again to the Celtic influence. What did we learn in the beginning? We learned that the variant or there were two variants or two types of Celtic that were used during just before the coming in of the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes. Okay. So, there are certain words from the Celtic language, okay, that have remained with us. It is not that we do not have that the Celtic language is found only towards Wales or Cornwall. Okay. There are certain words that have remained. For instance, Celtic place names, and I am going to go through this list here. If you look at the slide, Celtic place names like London, York, Kent, and that is from Canti, meaning unknown. Okay. So, these are the names that have remained, and there are certain words like come, a deep valley, in names like Duncombe, Tor, High Rock, Peak, in Torhill, Torcross, Tor, etc. And the names with Celtic with Celtic roots, for instance, Celtic rivers are Thames, Avon, Exe, Dover and Wye. So, you can imagine the two most famous words really when you look at England. Okay, London and Thames are from Celtic, and there are other Celtic loan words, for instance, bin, basket or crib, brock or badger, again come, a deep valley, and tor, which we have already talked about. So, this whole thing about this whole issue about the purity of a language, or that a language is Anglo-Saxon at the time and it comes only from the influence of the language of the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, is really misconception. Okay. In every language really in the world, you will find remnants of the previous languages, okay, and in different parts of a single country, you will find that in some areas there are the influence of more of the old language that was there. Okay. So, there is a lot of variety even if you look at Old English. Okay. Then the Latin influence, there was an acquiring of a considerable number of Latin words, evidences of a long Roman rule and additional Latin words that were acquired by the Celts. The reintroduction of Christianity by Roman missionaries resulted in an extensive adoption of Latin elements. So, also the Latin elements which were taken earlier, acquired by the Celts, have also remained and characterized some some parts at least of Old English. Now, regarding these borrowings, let me quote from A.C. Baugh's book, The History of the English Language. Baugh says, there were thus three distinct occasions, okay? There were thus three distinct occasions on which borrowing from Latin occurred before the end of the Old English period, and it will be of interest to consider more in detail the character and extent of these borrowings. Of course, since A.C. Baugh's work, a lot of work has been done, a lot of established work of course on this influence, okay, and particularly mentions three distinct occasions of occasions where Latin was Latin had an influence to which happened before the end of the Old English period. Regarding the Latin influence, again the Latin influence of the second period is the introduction of Christianity into Britain in 597, and Baugh says the new faith was far from new in the island, but this date, okay, this date 597, this date marks the beginning of a systematic attempt on the part of Rome to convert the inhabitants and make England a Christian country, right. And this you can refer here to the mission of Saint Augustine, then the general philosophy, okay, of the Teutons, and the preaching of active preaching of Christianity. Now, the influence of Christianity, okay, the influence of Christianity on the vocabulary. We find that Latin borrowings of the second period that we of Christianity can be divided into two groups. Phonetic forms that show early adoption and are found in literatures from the time of King Alfred, and words of a more learned character introduced during the religious revival that accompanied Benedictine reform. Right. So, now for instance, early borrowings that we can refer to which have stayed in the English language are church, the word church itself, bishop, then words that survive are also the words that may be included are abbot, disciple, epistle, hymn, temple, names of articles like cap, sock, silk, purple, chest, mat, sack, words denoting food and plants, for example, beet, caul, lentil, millet, oyster, dough, plant and mallow. Again, regarding education and learning, school, master, Latin, grammatic, verse, meter, miscellaneous words like anchor, fan, spelter, elephant, etc., and learned or literary words like circle, legion, consult and talent. So, this is the influence of Latin. So, these are some of for really for a beginner, for an introductory course, this is enough to know about Old English. And what I will do now by instead of a recap, I will try and initiate a question answer sort of a section, okay, a discussion. And from our brief discussion on Old English, for instance, what are the most important points which can come to you in the form of a question, okay. If you are asked what is the generally accepted date, okay, for or period or duration of Old English, then you would say that the Old English period phase of the English language is supposed to be from the 5th century, and particularly the middle of the 5th century to the middle of the 12th century, okay, and the precise dates are of course 5th century to 1150. That is the period of Old English, right. And again, what are the three generally accepted periods of the English language in general, the history of the English language? These are what? Old English, Middle English and Modern English. And we also had mentioned that early Modern English is also a phase that is added by historians, right. Then the next question we may ask is what is the sub branch, okay, what is the sub branch of Old English? Okay, we know that eventually English comes obviously from the it's an Indo-European language, it falls into the Indo-European group of languages, but what is its sub branch that we can refer to? Old English, it comes from West Germanic, okay. And the next question would be, if we do not look at dates from the point of view of historical events, okay, which are the two important landmark events, right, which sort of encapsulates the Old English period. And then you would say that there are two important events, okay, which mark the beginning of Old English and the end of Old English, and these are the Anglo-Saxon conquest of the island, and on the other extreme is the Norman conquest, okay. Following that, again the next question is who were the Anglo-Saxons, okay. The Anglo-Saxons are you said that are a group of marauding tribes that invaded England, and these were the Jutes, the Angles and the Saxons, okay. Now, if you get a question like where does the word England come from, okay. The word England comes from the name of one of these tribes, which is the Angles, okay. And we first had Angleland, then England and finally England. So, England owes its name to one of these three tribes, right. Then the next question is if we have to if you have to identify those areas in which Old English was most prevalent, okay, which are the areas, you know, before that we know that the language extent was Celtic, okay, but we also know that Celtic came to be more or less replaced, okay, replaced by Old English, and the Celts, as was mentioned by I think A.C. Boss, Simeon Potter, that the Celts offered neither friendship nor culture, and they sort of migrated towards the western part. Okay. So, then the answer would be England, okay, more of what, you know, most of what we call England today, and the southern and the eastern parts of Scotland. Okay. This is the area that we may identify today as the area in which Old English was most prevalent. Then, for instance, you may you know, if you are asked a question like, what are the dialects of Old English? Okay. Then there are 4 dialects of Old English, and these dialects are Northumbrian, okay, Kentish, Mercian and West Saxon. Then what, when you are given a script of Old English, what are the things that you are going to immediately mark, or what are the things that immediately come to your attention as being very different from modern English? Of course, are you know, are the spellings and the pronunciation of the script. And remember, we had seen a script from Beowulf, one of the most important, perhaps the most important Anglo-Saxon texts, and we found how difficult it would have been for us without any training to understand those words. Okay. So, the grammar is synthetic, while modern English is analytic, okay, and you also find the absence of French words, right. Then also you find, as far as number is concerned, okay, you find the presence of not just the singular and the plural, but also of something called the dual, right. Then another question may be posed to you is, name two of the most important texts from Old English literature, and we may cite the example of Beowulf and Kidman's hymn, okay, as the 2 most important texts from Old English literature. Then what are the names that have remained from Celtic, from Celtic influence, okay, which are important words today, and we know that these are place names or names of rivers, for instance, like Avon, like Thames. Place names like London, York, Kent, etc. are from Celtic, and words like Cumb or Deep Valley, and names like, you know, beginning with Tor, for instance. Tor means, as you know, a peak or a high rock. So, you have Tor Hill, Tor Cross, etc. Okay. And one of the, you know, final questions would be about the Latin influence. Okay. The Latin influence particularly came is evident even today, and it was also in those even today. The words like, you know, words that came from ecclesiastical practices. Okay. Words like, for instance, church. Okay. Words like church, words like bishop, right, hymn, temple, epistle, abbot, disciple, names also of articles like silk, sock, names of names denoting food like beet, for instance, plant, mallow, etc. Then we also have words coming from education and learning like school, master, the word Latin itself, grammatic, etc. And these are, you know, for a course that is introductory in nature, for, you know, that is being taught in English in engineering colleges and IITs in India. This is according to my you know, according to my thinking, this is enough for us, you know, to be acquainted with Old English literature. Okay. And in the next class, we are going to look at the next phase, which is called the Middle English phase of literature. Okay. Thank you for now.